So doing note 84 in reference to the Maamer, that's going to explain why the usage in this Medrash talks about the earth rather than the snow. In Kabbalistic terms, this version refers to the world's creation, but from a different perspective. The previous version that we had, which came from Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar, that the world was created from snow, the emphasis there is that there's myriads of stages of evolvement. That is to say that the idea of shell egg, the idea of the snow, reduces the levels of the influence of Hashem, the intensity of the Shem, from the levels of 300, and when he said to the 30, to the 3, that is going down the diminution from the levels of hundreds, tens to units. So that was that point. However, this version that we're examining at the moment, the version in the Midrash that the world was created from earth, refers only to Malchus of Atzilus and what is created from it, namely the three lower levels, the three lower worlds, the Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, which is the finite world. And in the words of Shayukot V'Yamuna in the Tanya, chapter 7, that name, which indicates the attribute of his Malchus, kingship, royalty, may he bless, is the name of Abnus, that is lordship. The idea that Hashem is the king, lord over the whole world. This is a, this is this is the attribute, and this name being that he is the Lord, it's an expression of the one which is much exalted from the levels of intimacy, but a level which goes beyond, and that is the idea of being Lord, Creator. Thus it is this attribute and this name, the name of Hashem as the Lord, Adnos, spelled Aleph Dalad Nun Yud. It's this attribute and this name which brings into existence and sustains the world, so that it should be, as it is now, a entity which feels and senses that it's completely independent, and it senses that it is a separate entity, to the point where in this world, in this existence, a person has to search for God. God is not obvious. His creative capability is not obvious. His creative capability has to be searched for. And therefore, a person is not absolutely nullified in the spiritual, as opposed to the spiritual worlds. In the spiritual worlds, it is obvious that there is a Lord and that there is a Creator. But in the lowest level of existence, in our physical world, we don't feel it as such. We feel that we are an independent entity, as if we created ourselves. And the same idea is presented in other places in Tanya, in Geras HaKodesh, chapter 20. He writes, it is known that the principle coming to being of the Yesh and the total distinct entity, that capability is through Malchus of Atzilus, which is what we're referring to. Which Malchus of Atzilus, when it descends as the creator in the next world, becomes a level which we call Atik, of the next world, Bria. And as the expression is, there's no king without a people, meaning that there has to be created entities for to be a king over, a lord over. And this is the reason why there are such a multitude of different creations, because Hashem is the creator over the entire worlds and differentiated bodies. So the multitude of creatures create creatures, and their division that was created by the force of the of Hashem, the one, an absolutely unique Ein Sof. It too is from the multitude of the letters that issue from Malchus, letters coming from the idea of Malchus, the mouth of Hashem, and all the hosts by the breath of his name. And Malchus is called Alma Disgalia. Malchus has got a reference to the revealed world, the manifest world. We have actually two expressions. We have the world which is hidden, the world which is revealed. Alma Disgalia, the manifest world, and Alma and the other expression, which the revealed world is differentiated to, which is not manifest, because it's and in the revealed world, Alma Disgalia, as opposed to the hidden world, Alma Disgasia, the covered world or hidden world, and that's we see that the light of Hashem, because through it, the revealed world is manifested the power of the light of the Ein Sof to create something out of nothing, without recourse to the power of Ilul Ve'olul, cause and effect. Within the framework of the 10 spheres, 9 of the 10 spheres are manifest through a cause and effect relationship. The light of the Ein Sof is vested in Chokhmah only, and that is the meaning of the beginning is wedged in the end, for Keser is the mediator between the emanator and the emanated. The lowest level of the Ein Sof is contained in it, and that's why there is a idea of a relationship between the level of Keser and Malchus, and Keser is called Keser Malchus because for a crown is but for a king, and also the lowest level of the Ein Sof, of the Malchus of Ein Sof. Consequently, from below upwards, Malchus of Atzilus is also called Keser, especially since through Malchus is the creation of the Neshamas, which are a Yesh, separate entities in the world of Bria. So the two usages of the Medrash and the Pirkei Rebbe Elazar, although both are talking about creation, the first version that we've used, the emphasis is that there's a creation through the diminution of the light till it comes to the physical world, to the world of Asiya, when the Ein Sof then creates creations. Or you can view it from the point of view of Malchus, where Malchus is the sphere which does the actual creation, and therefore we use the expression that we had about from the Medrash, that the world is created from the earth underneath the crown of glory of the seat of glory, the throne of Hashem, because it is this earth represents the lowest level, represents Malchus of Atzilus, and from that comes all the levels below it being created. So the two Medrashim that we've used, or the two excerpts, the Pirkei Rebbe Elazar and the Medrash, the Pirkei Rebbe Elazar views creation through all the spheres as one stage, as myriad stages of less intensity of spirituality, or you can focus only on the creative capability which is embedded in Malchus being the most instrumental role in the creation of the world. Both of those ideas still tell us that the world the world is created, and there is a connection, a continued connection from the source to the created entity. Now we used, and then in the original discussion, we used another analogy altogether, and we talked about that in order to create the world, Hashem wrapped himself in a white talus, and that's the level of his garment is like white snow. Now, that's the second medrash that we've really quoted, and it's a similar concept to the first, what we mentioned, the medrash of Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar. And let's look together at note 85 and see what he says there. That idea which we've expressed about the talus and Hashem in his light, but then he wrapped himself up and blocked the light through the white talus. Let's read the note. The Maamer now explains the second medrash quoted above concerning the creation of light in a similar manner in explaining the first medrash concerning the creation of the earth. And what is the idea? Again, this idea that we've said before, that for there to be a physical creation, there has to be a spiritual source, which in this particular case of the medrash is the light, and this is God enclothing himself in the white talus. The clothing conceals the intensity of the godly light, and being that we can in this analogy we can only see light coming through the talit, right? So it's the original light, the intensity of the original light is captured in the talit, and we can only see what's coming out of the talus, post the talus, right? So there's an interruption. We're not seeing the full intensity of the original light. So the clothing conceals godly light and allows for an entity of physical light to be created through the different stages of the decrease of the intensity of the light. And therefore the verse which we're quoting, that he is like his garment is like the white snow. The idea is that Hashem has some sort of level of talit or clothing or being wrapped, which decreases. It is white, but that level of intensity is decreased by the clothing. Now, this idea that there is many stages of reduction, contraction, so that there will be a creation, so there can be a creation from something, from a nothing, the something being the nothing. So in the main text, before we go to the note, in the main text, we use this expression that there is the creation, there is Yochal Lias Metzias His Avos Ha'er. Well, we can look in the English for that, and he says, from through the concealing garment, light can created through myriad stages of Hishtalshlus. Now, that's the Hebrew word. Hishtalshlus, we've talked about before, is the chain-like diminution of light. And then at some point, after there's been the diminution of light, then something is creating a manner of being from nothingness. Now, the next note that we're going to read, which really discusses the various levels of diminution, explains to us the concept of Seder Ishtalshlus, but in more technical terms, in the usage in Hasidus, we talk about the idea of tzimtzum. Now, we would be familiar with the idea of tzimtzum because we noted that it's used in Tanya, this expression tzimtzum. But tzimtzum literally means a contraction. So it's a contraction of light. But that contraction has two implications. The contraction has an implication of diminution, a reduction, a stepping down of intensity. It's also got an idea of that's embedded in reduction, a concealment. Now, the note that we're going to read discusses this at length. Okay, so let's look at note 86. The term myriad stages of evolvement. Right, so the Hebrew, our text used the words al yedei ravovos medregas ishtalshlus, many stages of ishtalshlus. But in other texts, we use the word tzimtzum. So now we're discussing the word tzimtzum. The word tzimtzum has two meanings. Number one, a contraction, a condensation, a reduction in, you could say, quality or intensity of the spiritual level that's in the light. But there's another embedded meaning in it, and that is concealment. When you contract, when you would just use the first meaning, contraction, what we're saying is that there's a diminution, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have the power. If I do a step down intensity of vision, I can still see my object. I just don't see it as clearly, right? But I can still see it. But when we use it for the point of concealment, what that means is that I'm being concealed. And as we're talking about within the talus, if you talk about a curtain, if you talk about light coming through, as an example, sunlight coming through a curtain, it's not just a reduction of light. When light comes through a curtain, that light which comes past the curtain isn't necessarily the original light of the sun. It's been changed. We're going to use a different expression. We're going to use an expression of refactoring, but the idea behind it being is that when I see light via a curtain, and let's talk about a thick curtain, let's not necessarily, if I talk about a curtain with holes, I can see the original light, and I've got a diminishment of the quantity, and I've certainly got a diminishment of a quality. But if we talk about a thick curtain, I can have absorbed light into the curtain, and then past the curtain, I see a reflected light. I see the light which was generated by the original light, but I can see light that is no longer light of the original sun rays. So those are the word tzimtzum has got both of those meanings in it. There is a tzimtzum, which a reduction of quality and quantity, but there's also a reduction of quality of actual light. It's no longer the same light. And that's what's implied by these words, which we said, the multiple al yidei rivuve, through the myriads, thousands of stages of contraction. Let's continue with the note and see how the note's expressing it. The word tzimtzum has two meanings: contraction, condensation, and the second, a concealment. The doctrine of tzimtzum, the philosophy of tzimtzum, refers to a refraction and a concealment of the radiating emanation from godliness. Now, refraction is no longer the same light, right? When we talk about refraction of light, right, we're talking about that, it's being bent. In the physical sense, we talk about it being bent, broken up, right? It's no longer the same thing, right? It's concealed, it's showing light. We might be able to read with this light, but it's no longer the same. In the same sense, we're talking about that when there's the concealment of godliness in those multiples of stages and a progressive development, it comes down to a level where the spirituality has been so concealed that finite, even though the original light was infinite, now finiteness can be revealed, and the finiteness can be so finite to the point that spirituality is all gone and physical substances have become possible. Continuing, prior to creation, there is but God alone. God, as he is himself, is called Ein Sof, infinite, without limit. Of God, when we talk about him in the state or the perception of Ein Sof, so at that stage, we don't know anything. There's no constraining, but there's no even knowledge about Hashem in the state of Ein Sof, because all we can say is that he is Ein Sof. He is beyond limit. As the Zohar quotes, he is high above all heights, hidden beyond all concealments, beyond anything graspable, beyond anything hidden. No thought can grasp you at all. You have no known name, because all the names that we have for God is at some aspect that he reveals himself to us, which is constraining in some sense. But the level of Ein Sof doesn't have a name because that it has no constraints. And Hashem, in that state, you are the perfection of them all. That is the quote from the Zohar. So in the Tanya, when it explains this, it describes and says the creation of the worlds is not by way of development of Ilul V'Olul, because as we expressed previously, for even if there would be multiple of diminution stages, and there is contractions of the sort that we talked about, quality differential, as well as the quality being so differentiated, so hidden, that it's totally concealed, like a change of that between the curtains, so that the light is no longer the light. So continuing reading that note, but even if there was myriads of these changes, but from grade to grade in some sort of cause and effect methodology, that will not avail the development coming in, and that would not even avail the possibility of something physical coming into an existence, not even something spiritual like the heavens. Rather, it is the power of the level of Ein Sof, total infinite, which is the one that actually creates something out of nothing, but this is not through the cause and effect method. So, discussing this more along, the Tanya has described that, but continuing this note, so the creation of a non-divine finite entity, something physical, requires in the process of emanation a radical step, a change, a total leap, or a jump. In Hebrew, we use the word dilog or kvitza, and this jump or this kvitza breaks the gradualization and establishes a major distinction, not just in quality, but it becomes a new thing. It breaks the graduation and establishes a radical distinction between the realms of cause and effect, and it becomes a totally new thing, an act of creation. And only after that has occurred can there be a further evolutionary process culminating in finite and material entities. How does that original break happen? Now we'll discuss the original break. When it arose in the divine will to create the world, the first act in the creative process is to bring about a space. Now we use the word space, but we don't mean a physical space. We mean a dimension, a spiritual dimension, a place which can be not overwhelmed by all the divine emanations. So the first act in the creative process was to bring about a space in which divine emanation and ultimately the evolving finite world could have a place to exist, as opposed to becoming totally dismembered in the intensity of the light everywhere. And this initial space is brought about by a contraction or withdrawal of divinity, of godliness into itself, and the infinite light of the Ein Sof is drawn into himself, so that it's totally screened, dimmed, hidden, and concealed. And when then there is a no space, an empty space, in the Zohar we use the expression mokum ponui or cholul, it evolves into a primordial place, and this is the first Simsum. This is called, in our linguistics, in our framework, it's called Simsum Arishon, the first Simsum, which then creates this radical leap so that there is no more level of spiritual, there is a space where an entity, if spiritual light was put there, would not be dissolved into that entity. And then that is a concept of divine self-limitation, but not necessarily revelation. But there is a second phase in that creative process when then there is a radiation of divine light is made to beam in the primeval space of the cholol, and this we call the kav, thin light, as a source of the subsequent emanations. It carries within it a creative and energizing force of creation, and it is actually the involvement of the highest levels of God in creation. And the same time, it's concealed in it's concealed in itself, and it might be revelatory, but it carries with it the all-encompassing transcendence of God into all creation. The Kav itself undergoes numerous successive contractions and concealments until it has the capability, until it comes to the point where it actually will create. And that is the discussion of the myriad levels. We use the expression, the text uses the expression, the myriad of levels, rebovos medregas hashtalshlos. And then at that point, can there be the creation of something from nothingness? Okay. So I think that that's been a good discussion of the notes, and we will come back, to the main text now. And perhaps at our next time that we do something together, we'll continue with the when we continue learning in our next session, we'll go back to the main text and we'll continue these ideas.